Computers, so we're now recording.
Alrighty.
The live transcript. Okay, so first I want to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the third installment of our graduate preparation series. That's how I want to put it. So I think a couple of you have joined in a different workshop as well, but if not, and this is your first workshop, welcome. So this workshop is going to focus on particularly the personal statement aspect of a graduate application essay. However, I did think when I posted this on Canvas or advertised it, I also mentioned that this, even if you're not sure about graduate school, if you're going to go to graduate school, this is also a good exercise for even if you're writing like a cover letter for a job, because they're very similar in nature, in terms of how you have to kind of structure these things, what you're trying to highlight, and how to be succinct and highlight your best self. So I'm going to turn it over to our lovely presenter. Some of you are familiar with him, Mr. RJ Portella, who is a learning specialist in our learning center. And I'm going to go ahead and give him the floor.
All right. Well, or the screen or whatever.
Whatever, you know.
Thanks, Dr. Mayers. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is RJ, and we're going to talk about the grad exams here, specifically the application essays. So quick question, can you see this, Dr. Mayers? All right, good. So I'm going to leave it not in presenter mode because it makes it a lot easier to click through, and plus I can anticipate what's coming up. So you're going to see some of the same slides. For example, my biography here. I'm not going into this. Suffice to say, I've been doing this since peer tutoring in high school for about 30 years. I have a side business about the standardized tests and navigating students through the application processes for both undergrad and college and graduate programs as well. You'll see my email down here on the bottom. So if you ever need to get in touch with me, you can always email me. You'll have access to these slides. You'll have access to the recording. And if you're ever in the Learning Center, my office is in here. I am very easy to find, and I encourage you to come to me with any and all questions you have about the process to make sure that you're doing it diligently and in the right order to make sure that you get your applications in on time. And also putting your best feet forward. So the overview of the 3 workshops, we had the 2 of them already about the test landscapes. And also the second one was about paying for the tests and the affordable test preparation. And here we are with the graduate school application essay or essays from generation to polished products. So let's take a look at the agenda here. We're going to recap the first 2 workshops. We're going to talk about the timeline of these essays. The timeline is very important here. You do not want to wait until the last minute to do these essays. They're very important. They are your thumbprint on the application. Anyone can submit a GPA or test scores, but this is really when the admissions officers get to know who you are, where you came from, what you've done, and where you intend on going, specifically about how you match to their programs. Then number 4, we're going to talk about writing for the admissions officers, how to keep the audience in mind, how to generate the drafts, what resources you have for feedback, and we'll also stop along the way for any questions that you might have. So if you do have questions, you can always throw them in the chat. I'll see the chat box light up. You can always direct message them to me. If you don't want to put it in the general chat, I will make sure I address the question, but I will not identify you because sometimes people get a little nervous about asking questions, which is totally fine. Okay, so as we go through here, we're going to recap the first 2 workshops. They are both recorded. They're both available. Number 1, that action plan is really about deciding on the graduate program and finding out what tests are required. If they're required, you have to take them. If they say recommended, take that as required. You don't want to have a gap in your application process there that other people competing for the same spots may already have fulfilled. And then you also want to make a 6-month calendar, identify the test date that you would need, leaving time to report the scores, and build backwards about 6 months to make sure that you have adequate prep You want to make sure you take an initial practice test so you can find out what your baseline scores are. Then you can talk to any of us for resources on how to proceed. Now, regarding those free resources that we covered in the second presentation, you can see in the Google Slides, there are links to every single test that have free resources for practice tests, for Quizlet flashcards, for other practice tests, or banks of questions that the tests have. We also have those test prep materials that are in the Learning Center. There is a nice big EOF library of test prep materials. And then remember, if you weren't at the last session, if you generate a full action plan to take these tests, we may be able to, EOF may be able to help you with the test registration costs, but that includes taking the diagnostic, having a goal date in mind, knowing where you're going to take the test, and anticipating what the deadline is. And if you come with all of those elements prepared, EOF may be able to help you with the test registration cost, because those costs are anywhere from $102 to $350. And that's significant. Specifically, if you might have to retake the test, you want to make sure that you have as much help with those costs as possible. So those are the recaps of the first two workshops. And we now move on to the timeline of the essays. Now, these personal statements, depending on how many programs you're applying to, you may only be applying to one. That might be a little dangerous. You might want to apply to maybe two of them for options, maybe even three, but you want to be careful. You want to be very targeted about these graduate programs. Sometimes I see people who are applying to 5, 6, upwards of 10 programs. Ooh, that worries me a little bit. You're going to have a lot of essays to cover, which is fine. There may be some overlap, but you're also going to be paying application fees for every single one of those applications. And the more that you do, you could run into $300, $400, $500 worth of application fees. And if you were not convinced that you should be in that program, you might not want to apply. Obviously, we don't want you to limit yourself, but we also don't want you to overextend yourself. So regarding the timeline of the essays, you want to mirror the test prep timeline. Figure out when the goal dates are, and then you want to work backwards, right? You want to catalog all of those essays. You want to be asking yourself, how many do I need for each school? What are the word counts for each one? And if you're applying to multiple programs, you're going to find that a lot of these essays have topics that overlap. And you may be able to use one essay that you have really polished, and you may be able to apply it to 2, maybe 3 programs, so you don't have to constantly reinvent the wheel and generate new essays for all these different programs. So whereas on the test prep timeline, I recommend counting back 6 months, on your essays, you already have that experience locked in your heart and in your spirit. So it's not going to take you nearly as long to generate based on your experience, but it may take you a decent amount of time to polish the product so that you're submitting something that has a lot of detail, tells them about yourself, accurately puts that thumbprint on the application, and also where you have time to get feedback on it. So if you look under here, what I would recommend is in the first month, you're going to want to generate those drafts. In the second month, you're going to want to give ample time to get feedback from multiple sources. This is not a matter of running it through a spell and a grammar check and it's good to go. You want to get different inputs from Dr. Mayers, your EOF counselor. I am standing by to help you. In fact, this is one of my favorite things to do for students. I love application essays because it's again a way to fully identify yourself to those admissions officers. Maybe there are coworkers that you have that you trust, or professors that you have relationships with. You want to get all of these different eyes on the paper so that you get all sorts of different feedback, because I may read it from an admissions officer lens. Your EOF counselor may help you identify things about being a first-generation student that you may already know in your head, but you actually haven't explicitly put on paper, and those are rich parts of your identity. And then in the third month, you want to polish the products so that when the deadline is approaching to submit, you have everything done and you just attach it and click submit and you're good. Okay. Also, in these 3 months, you want to use them to reach out to any references you need. Many graduate programs require 3 references, and that could be from your EOF counselor. It could be from professors. If you have work experience out in the field, if you're doing an internship, maybe you want your boss to write a letter of recommendation. So you have a multi-dimensional landscape that you are submitting. You have 1 professional, 1 academic, 1 advising, or maybe you do 2 professors and 1 boss. Whatever you think puts the best feet forward for you, then you're going to want to do it. Now, also keep in mind, look at number 5. There are some programs, depending on where you're applying, that will want a writing sample. So as you go through school in your undergraduate degree, start thinking about what is your best work from college. Was there a research paper that you did really, really well on that had a lot of references in it? And it was, maybe over 5 pages. You don't want to submit maybe a 1 to 2 page sample unless that's okay with them. If they just want a 1 to 2 page sample, fine. But you want to look at your best work and you want to save it, and then you can amend it a little bit or maybe proofread it before you submit it if they do want a writing sample. Some programs don't want it, but I can guarantee you if you're applying for a humanities like an English or maybe an anthropology or a psychology, they're probably going to want a writing sample, okay? So that's the timeline of the essays and what you want to be thinking about, which is about gathering resources for feedback, reaching out to your references, and also looking at any of your best work so that you can save it, add it to a Google Drive so it's readily available for you, okay? Let's take a look now at housing and storing the essays. Believe it or not, this may sound like common knowledge to you, but it definitely bears repeating. You want to make sure that all of these essays live online as opposed to in a Word doc or somewhere else that could potentially be lost, or if a computer crashes, that you will lose the work. You do not want to do that. The best way is in Google Docs. There are a lot of benefits there. You have the autosave feature. Also, if you look, watch, if you look up in here under tools, you may not know this. You see where it says voice type speaker notes? If you click on that, it brings up the little recording, and then you click on that and you can start actually writing in the notes voice to text, which if you look at the bottom of the page, you can see that it's coming in and it's actually pretty accurate. Okay. So I will delete those. Also in Google Docs, it's easy to share with anyone else who may be giving feedbacks. And there's also that comments feature where they can put comments on the right-hand side and you can see those comments immediately. The benefits here is that it's accessible from any electronic device, and it does have a spell check and a grammar check, but that's like way down the line. You really want to build the content first. But what you want to do is you want to avoid those places that those essays could potentially be lost. For example, you could have it on a flash drive, but flash drives are very small and get lost very easily. And if you have it on a Word doc, if your computer crashes for whatever reason or runs out of juice on you, whatever the case is, you may end up, unless you're auto-saving it, you may end up missing like an entire paragraph that was really good and you thought was a really good first draft, and now you have to rebuild it. Pencil and paper, I know that's very old school. There are some people who do like to write on pencil and paper, which is fine, but please make sure that it stays in one location so that you can easily access it. So that's a little bit of a consideration for housing and storing the essays. Really, Google Docs is the best way to go. So I'm going to pause here. If anyone has any questions, you can either throw them into the chat, or if you just want to unmute and ask, go right ahead. Any questions on the timeline or how to house or store the essays? Any questions? Okay, I don't see anyone unmuting, but if you want to throw it in the chat, I will make sure I come back to it. I promise you. All right, so now let's take a look at common topics that you're going to see on a lot of these essays. And if you look at all 7 there, you're going to see these pop up somewhere. Talk about your proudest accomplishment, something that happened, along the way. And I would generally say if you're dealing with the proudest accomplishment, you want it to be within the last 5 years. I don't know if you necessarily want to talk about if you won the spelling bee in 4th grade, which could be fine, but it's also got a link to your graduate work. Otherwise, it's a little outdated. Now, you got to be careful about number 2, overcoming some kind of adversity. Every one of us has overcome some adversity in our lives, but you want to be careful that the essay doesn't take on a tragic feel where the entire essay is about all of the pain and suffering you went through. You want to come at it from a lens of where's the hope, right? Where's the hope of the situation and what did you learn from the situation? They'll probably ask you to talk about a difficult choice that you made. And that tends to be one of the richest types of essays because you get an opportunity to set the scene and build up to how the choice came about, and then especially what you did with that choice and what you learned. And you're seeing a running theme here, which is where did you come from, what happened, and what did you learn from it? Specifically, how you're not only growing from it, but how you're going to remain teachable. Number 4, they'll talk about possibly prompting you with who is a mentor to you and why. And if that's the case, name them. Talk about who the mentor is. I would also ask that, you ask the mentor if you still have a relationship with them, and I hope you do, if it's okay with them if you name them and give their title, because you want to be respectful of people's, possible anonymity, whatever the case may be there. Some prompts will ask you to talk about your internships and your field experience, but it also requires you to have that. And one of the things we talked about in the prior workshops is if you are approaching graduate school and you don't have any practical experience, you're going to want to link with the Career Center immediately and find out what options are available so you have some field experience to talk about. It's very difficult if that's a required essay and you don't have experience. You're going to have it, which means it may delay your grad school process a little bit if those programs require it. So just keep that in mind. You always want to be looking ahead at what these schools look for and what you can bring to the table. Number 6, your personal strengths and weaknesses. It's a very reflective essay about what assets you have that you bring to the table to the program, and also about what you want to work on, which shows a level of self-reflection in your essays that you can talk about, but you also want to make sure that you're not bragging about your strengths, and you also want to make sure you're not self-deprecating about your weaknesses, right? We are not going for sympathy here. We are going for what your rich experience of your rich identity is, and how you can talk about it in an academic, formal way that shows them that you are self-aware. And then finally, something about your identity or your background that maybe you are proud of or that you would like to share. What is very important about, maybe like number 2, number 6, and number 7 is if you are sharing about your identity or your background, make sure that you keep the focus on you. You use I statements. You want to be very careful about making broad generalizations about a certain culture or a certain demographic, because as you'll see later on in the things to avoid slide, you never know who the reader is, right? You want to keep that in mind. And the best way to ensure that you're not offending anyone in any way, shape, or form is to keep the focus on you and use very personal I statements, not everyone or they or you, because that sounds preachy. Keep it in the first person, keep it in I statements, okay? Now we're going to talk about writing for admissions officers. This is arguably the most important slide on here, and this is the landscape of what you want to keep in mind. When you are writing, there is a certain mindset that you should have going into this. And number one, make sure that you do your research on the programs that you're applying to. What are their mission statements? What are their core values? What kind of practical work do they do in that graduate program? And if you see opportunities, and this could be an easy website search, you could also call an admissions officer and talk to them. What opportunities that they have going on there do you envision yourself participating in? And like Dr. Mayers said at the beginning, you want to link your skills and experience to their values, their mission, and their opportunities. That's no different from a cover letter. If I read an ad that says, we're hiring people who can do this, 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 and this, in your cover letter, you're going to take those bullet points and you're going to match them to your experience. For example, if you're dealing with a high volume of customers in a day, right, on a cover letter for a job, they want you to deal with a high volume of customers, and you were a camp counselor for 6 years, then they know that you are nimble and can deal with a bunch of people at one time and kind of take them through whatever process it is, that you can do your multitasking. So whatever these programs want from a graduate applicant, you're going to want to match your experience to what they want. That will make for a very rich essay and it will resonate with them. But as you move forward on these, you want to start thinking about, and I would start thinking about it now because you may have never done this before. You want to document thoughts about significant events in your life. For example, if you were awarded something, what did that mean to you? Perhaps you experienced the death of a loved one. Now remember, you don't want it to be tragic. But for example, my father passed away my freshman year of high school, and that was a very significant event. And I talked about it in my application essay when I applied to NYU and other colleges as well. I ended up going to NYU. And what I talked about in there was I did not detail, what he went through. I did not detail the decline in his health. But what I did talk about was how the trauma of the experience, I redirected my energy into my studies, which then afforded me a career in education. So you bring the hope, always represent the hope from what you are dealing with. Talk about being a first-generation student and what it was like balancing everything. There are a ton of experiences that you have within you right now. And Dr. Mayers and I 100% believe this. You have all of these rich experiences. You want to ask, what are they? When did they happen? What did you learn from it? And most specifically, how did your views change from before that event to afterwards? Remember what I said before, the running theme here is they want to know where you came from, what you learned, specifically with your undergrad academics and your professional experience, and where you are now. But one of the hallmarks of a very good application essay is, how are you going to grow in this program? This is not you coming to the table being like, look at me, this is what I did, love me, love me. What it is this is where I am, and this is what happened, and how am I going to remain teachable to grow and evolve in this program? Those are the hallmarks of a good admissions essay. So keeping that in mind before we get into any questions, generating the drafts. When you actually sit down to put either pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, there are a couple of things that I want you to remember. Number one, immediately ignore the word limits. A lot of times people sit down, they see 600 words, and they immediately close their mindset off to trying to create a finished product in 600 words. Don't do it. Ignore the word limit. You are not trying to fit jigsaw puzzle pieces into some kind of framework. What you are doing is you are building coal that you're going to compress and edit later on into diamonds, right? Overwrite, overproduce, write as much as you can, because later on when you get feedback from people, you're going to figure out, oh, that paragraph is kind of redundant. I don't really like the way that sounds. This could have more detail. I can spice up the verbs later on. But you know, you can't make a polished product without a draft, right? Number 2, are you a typer or a talker? Now, if you're both, great. If you're a typer, sit down, keep that laptop handy, because when things strike you as you start to think about these things, you're like, oh God, what about that time that happened? Ooh, that's good. Let's open up the laptop, start typing. But remember, if you're a talker, meaning that if sometimes you ever sit down at a keyboard and you like completely freeze, even though you know what's swirling around in your head, what you might want to do is use that talk to text function and put on the microphone and just start talking. Maybe if you have a friend who would sit with you so you can pretend like you're telling them that story, they can even ask you questions to start generating more material. And the next thing you know, you talk for like 10 minutes and you've got 2 pages worth of raw material that you can then look at. Sometimes, if you don't have someone sitting there, maybe interviewing you, just close your eyes and start talking. A lot of times it works very well. Or you could tell your story to a trusted source and again, record it to transcribe, or you can use the talk to text feature. Okay. If you need someone to interview you and you don't know where to come to, hello, you come to me, I will help you. One of my favorite things to do, like I said before, these application essays, because it is, again, your thumbprint on this. So if you're really stuck, come in, we'll have about a 45-minute to an hour meeting, and I will not only interview you, but I will even take notes on it to get you started, okay? Then what you want to do is look at the raw material and start organizing it from there, all right? Now I'm going to pause again for any questions. You can either unmute or throw them into the chat. Any questions? Okay, I don't see anyone unmuting. Again, I will return to the chat later on. If you have a question, you can send to me. Now I'm going to show you a picture here, and I want you to just digest it for a second. This is the best example I could find on Google Images, but it does make my point. When you are writing your essays, I want you to be as detailed as possible. Because what happens is most students end up with a little cow on the right. They end up making broad generalizations and they don't tell the details of who they are. And if you keep it general, you are not distinguishing yourself from anyone else in that pile of essays that they have either in front of them or on the screen. And if you're not distinguishing yourself, your chances of being accepted might drop significantly. But if you go to the details and you offer all of that color and detail that's in there, they get a much clearer picture of who you are and where you're coming from and where you want to go, right? We'll talk about a couple of examples about that later on. And to be perfectly honest, I was going to come up with some examples of essays that weren't really that good versus essays that were very rich in detail. And I decided against it for this presentation because everyone is unique in their journeys and everyone has a unique story. So I thought by putting examples up there that it wouldn't really serve what we're doing here. But you want to avoid generalizations. For example, you'll see a sentence later on that says, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish my goals. What does that mean? I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Are you going to ski backwards on buttermilk down the Ben Franklin Bridge? Wouldn't that qualify as anything? I mean, if you're willing to do it, it would be hilarious to see. However, that does not link to specifically what your experience is, and also what they're looking for in the program. You don't want to do that. You want to avoid those generalized statements. So as you start drafting, I'm going to give you a couple of items to remember to include down the way, and also some things that you want to avoid. And here they come. When you are writing, you want to include sensory details. You want to talk a little bit about what you saw, what you heard, maybe what you smelled, as long as it's appropriate and serves your personal statement. You know, you don't want the whole thing to be a sensory detail essay, but those details, if you strategically put them in, could really bring the reader in. Okay. You also want a catalyst, which is an opening loaded line that grabs the reader's attention. Take a look at this line here that I borrowed from a graduate essay. A burst blood vessel in the brain of my former university president provided the tragic high and low point in my young public relations career. Whoa, that is very descriptive, right? It tells me where the person is at, young public relations career. It tells me what they did. It also talks about a relationship to a university president. We already have that it's a high and a low, so the person's going to talk about both of those. And we also have the defining moment, which is a burst blood vessel. In that one sentence, I have so much detail that I am impelled to read on and find out what this person has to say. Don't worry about coming up with that opening loaded line immediately. What you're going to do is you're going to generate all of this raw material, and I can guarantee you that somewhere in there, we're going to find a line that's going to be that opening clincher. For example, I remember working with a student who talked about her younger sister who always said oopsie. So we started the essay with oopsie, my younger sister said as she fell down the steps, right? So that immediately takes us into a house. It takes us into this student and the younger sister. And we have, you know, a situation where the writer is going to build on. So it immediately takes us into the world of what's happening. You don't want to spend too much time giving a lot of extra detail, because if you only have 600 words down the line, eating up real estate, giving details that you could embed in one sentence, you don't need it. It's going to eat up a chance for you to say something original about yourself. Take a look at number 3. Again, advisors are major positive influencers. If you did research with someone, if you worked on a project, if it was with a vice chancellor or a dean, you're going to want to name those people. But I would also make sure that it's okay with them if you name them. 99% of the time, I would think it would be. In terms of your major points, once you have all of that raw material, if you come to a conclusion that is key to your essay, I would recommend, you know, you have like a paragraph, and then you come to a major point, make that one line its own paragraph. For example, once the writer sets up a whole scene, one sentence, in that moment, I realized I was not a chemist, but a lawyer, right? It kind of lets the plane land, and then keeping it separated as its own sentence will signify to the reader that that's a major point. Okay. Also, as many specific details as you can come up with would be great. Remember that coloring book analogy? You want to make sure that you're putting in as much detail as possible so they get a very good sense of who you are. And then for the conclusion, you kind of want to, you don't want to just wrap up everything and restate everything you said. Again, that's extra detail. They've already gotten it. You don't want to just like tie the shoelace up and put the shoe back in the closet, right? You want to touch the plane down and take it off again, leaving the reader wanting more. In other words, from start to finish, from word 1 to word 600, you want to take the reader on a journey. So if they were to look back at that first sentence, they really feel that they went on a journey with you through the essay. And that's a little bit of an art form. But how does that art form come about? By making sure that you get lots of feedback and that you revise a lot of times. Now, we talked about what to include. Let's talk about what to avoid in your graduate application essays. Take a look at number 1. Do not just list your accomplishments. This is not the me show. That is not what they want, right? You also want to be careful about listing someone else's tragedy or personal suffering unless you use it very minimally to set a scene and how you reacted to it. Remember, you're keeping this on you. Number 3, you want to be very careful about stating opinions on controversial topics or commentary on any identities. For example, there's an example of a Harvard essay where the applicant wrote about volunteer work that they did in Haiti. And all the person talked about was how those people suffered and what their opinion of it was. Not keeping in mind that the person reading that essay was from Haiti and was offended because there is a rich culture in Haiti. And it is not only just suffering, that there are personal parts to their identities that went unnoticed and ignored by the applicant. And you don't want to offend the reader. You never know who the reader is and what their identity is, which is why you keep it on you and you keep it on what you experienced and how you're matching your qualifications to the essay or to the program, excuse me. You want to avoid any kind of harsh criticism of any population or on the program you just completed. You want to bring the hope and look for the positives. Like I said in number 5, those broad generalizations, I call them Hollywood endings. Oh, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to achieve my goals. Cool story, sis. You haven't told us anything about you. And you've also blown a chance to say something specific. Now, here comes like an art form in the writing. And this is very big. And this is something you're going to want to look at when you're doing revisions. You want to avoid vague words. The word it or thing or better or worse. Those are 4 terrible words to use because they are very unspecific, right? It and thing can always be replaced with a noun. And verbs like is, was, and are, and were, those are very bland linking verbs. You want to replace them with something spicy. For example, if you said, the professor's influence on me was significant, you can turn that around and say, the motivation that my professor provided galvanized me to research more on my topic. Ooh, a spicy verb, right? And you want to also avoid words like never, always, and only. Those are sweeping absolutes. And it may accidentally read as you're closed-minded, like I never do this, or this always happens, or only when this happens. You want to be careful about that, okay? And then finally, in conclusion, like I said, you don't want to say in conclusion. You don't want to recap everything you just said. You want to forward your own narrative and touch the plane down and take it off again. All right. Now, that is what to include and what to avoid. And I recommend that you come back to these slides, especially when you are proofreading, to make sure that you have the right tone and that you have that you're avoiding things that could harm the overall impact of the essay. So now let's take a look at the resources you have for feedback. For example, you can meet with me, you can meet with your EOF counselor, maybe professors that you want to get feedback on. We also have writing assistants here in the Learning Center. And if you go on Raptor Connect, on your homepage in the right-hand corner where it says make appointments or get tutoring, if you click on that, you can find through the Learning Center general writing assistants and put in there, I'd like some feedback on my graduate application essays, okay? You also have the Writing and Design Lab, which is another resource on campus, and the website is right there. If you haven't used it, it is a wonderful resource, and there are many graduate students who work there, so they've even been through this process. Believe it or not, your peers, they know you. They know your experience. You've gotten to know them over the past 3 or 4 years. Let them proof it for you. Maybe you missed an important detail that, it's funny, sometimes we think we put it in the essay, But remember, the admissions officer reading it doesn't know you. So you may have something that that you thought you put in there, but believe it or not, when you actually proofread it, it's nowhere in there. And your peers may be like, hey, you forgot this. Also, your trusted professors, if you have a good connection with them, ask them for a proofread. And like I said before, I wanted to put some examples in the presentation, but I ended up just putting a link in there. And if you research good graduate school application essays, you will find a ton of examples online. All right. Any final questions? You can unmute or put them in the chat. And we have a question in there. Where can I find the previous slides from the last sessions? I am going to send those over to Dr. Mayers, who also has the recordings, and they will be made available to you. And then within those slides, you'll be able to view them, and you'll be able to click on any of those links to find all of the references. Okay. Any other questions? You are very welcome, Shakayla. Oh, great. And Dr. Mayers already has it. The recordings are currently on Canvas under the modules. Any other questions or concerns that you have?
I do want to throw something out there.
Sure.
So just to reiterate some of the things that RJ said in his wonderful presentation, if you were unable to attend the first two workshops, but you do feel like you're going to need some support if you're thinking about graduate school in the next year. So you're thinking about maybe taking a graduate school exam or a prep course or anything, please let me know. We do have a library already established, but we're going to be putting a lot of books and things in that library that can be utilized. So if you want to start looking into programs or options for yourself. And then if you are one of those individuals who is currently we're getting ready to apply for maybe this upcoming year, so you are going to have to practice writing some sort of letter, an interest letter, personal statement, please let me know. There is an option now. RJ offered to look at your letters and support you, which is wonderful. We do also have some funds to have some drop-in tutoring available specifically for our students. And I can set that up for some time in April. So if you think that's something that would be beneficial for you, feel free to throw it in the chat. I'm just not sure where everyone is in their journey, but you can always practice. I mean, even if you're not ready, like the application isn't ready or you haven't applied yet, you can generally find these type of questions online under admissions applications. So it might be just good practice because, as RJ mentioned, that even if you're not ready for grad school, these things are very applicable to cover letters for jobs. A lot of times when I'll just use like what we do at Rutgers, for example. So a lot of times we're looking for in a cover letter, somebody to be able to sell themselves and what their skills are. So if I'm reading a cover letter, I'm looking for like their background a little bit, why they're interested in this position, and how their skills and experiences are going to basically help me in this position. So why should I hire this person? What makes them stand out? And you want to be succinct in that. So you don't want it to be a 3-page cover letter, or, you want it to be to the point, but also give the person a great picture of who you are and why you're interested. And that's a skill. It's not easy to write these things and to write it in a way that's appealing. So I encourage you to practice and practice often, because it'll make it much easier. Like if you suddenly decide to go to grad school, or even if a job pops up and you quickly have to apply, you already kind of have the skills down. So I just wanted to plug that. And that, yes, all these recordings are going to be on our Canvas page under our spring modules section, along with the actual PowerPoints.
Wonderful. So, on a final note, I want to thank you all for coming today. And if you were also at other presentations, if you have not seen the other ones, please do take a look at them, because, this process is in general very overwhelming, and we get it. Dr. Mayers and I have both been through this ourselves. and pretty much anyone else on campus who is either staff or faculty, et cetera. We've been through this process and we are here to help you. So if you ever have any questions, we are just one email or stop by away. Okay.
Well, thank you so much to RJ for this
Thank you.
wonderful presentation. And if no one has any other questions, then I hope you all have a great day.